Joining us now for World Brief and the review of some of the headlines of today's newspapers from around the world is Adefemi Akinsanya. Good morning, Adefemi.
Morning, Dr. Ruben. Good morning, Ayo, and good morning, Rufai.
Very fair moon.
Hey.
Welcome, man.
That is me. What weekend it was?
I told you Arsenal, we beat Leeds.
We did, 4-0. Well done to the Gunners. Well done to Chelsea for fighting back at Stamford Bridge. Very well done.
Don't talk about that team.
Oh.
I put them in God's hands.
Oh, really? Good morning to you, viewers. Let me tell you what's happening around the world. Now, it's a new month, so let's take a look at the countries going to the polls across the next 28 days. So let's take a look at what we've got. So we do know that Sunday, the 8th of February will be a very busy day. But firstly, let's just take a look at the different countries. So you've got Costa Rica, 1st of February, they're going to have their presidential election. They actually had theirs already, so we're still waiting to see who has won. That was on Sunday. But as I said, the 8th of February is going to be a very popular day across the world. You've got Japan, Thailand, Portugal going to the polls. And then over in the Caribbean on the 11th of February, you've got Barbados. Thereafter, the day after, you've got Bangladesh and then Laos in Southeast Asia going to the polls on the 22nd of February. So let's take a close look at these different elections. So let's start with Japan. Essentially, we did talk about the fact that she had called for a snap election. So following that call for a snap election last month, Japan's first woman Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, she's looking to strengthen her mandate as voters in Japan will elect all 465 members of the House of Representatives. We'll see if her gamble pays off. And then moving on to Thailand, in addition to electing all 500 members of its House of Representatives, Thailand will also hold a referendum on whether or not, essentially they're going to ask citizens if they want to adopt a new constitution. So we will see what that referendum result into. And moving on to Portugal, we've got a very interesting runoff election. So following the first round of the presidential elections last month, pro-European socialist José Seguro, who we have here on the left here, he is going to face off against the Eurosceptic, hardline nationalist André Ventura of the Chega party in Portugal. So we'll see what the second round of elections does for both of these guys, who you couldn't tell too far between in their first run. And then coming over to the Caribbean, Mia Mottley is going to, her Barbados Labour Party is going to the polls on the 11th of February. And essentially that general election will see the longtime Prime Minister, Mia Mottley, decide whether or not her party will be able to retain its majority. So we'll see what happens in all of these different elections. Now, moving on to the Middle East, there is an update on this Israel-Gaza ceasefire, and we do now know that the Rafah border crossing between the Gaza Strip and Egypt reopens today, and that's after 2 years of closures and temporary openings. But there are restrictions, so let's take a look at what we are expecting. So first things first, Israeli Prime Minister, the Israeli media reporting that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he's only going to allow 50 medical patients a day to leave. Each of those patients will be allowed to travel with 2 relatives, but that is the restrictions. And in addition to a maximum of 50 people who left Gaza during the war, they would be allowed to return each day. A maximum of 50 who left Gaza are able to come back in. And that can increase if this first phase of this reopening is successful. We also know that Israel will continue to use technical recognition software to verify those leaving Gaza to make sure that they are on the list of approved names who are allowed to leave. And for those entering Gaza from Egypt, they must pass through an IDF checkpoint after crossing Rafah for approval. So this is still quite heavily controlled by the likes of Israel. As it stands now, there are no plans to allow the Rafah crossing to be used for the transportation of aid and goods, which according to Israel goes through different crossings where there are screened for contraband and different types of weapons. So as it stands now, it's only people who are going to be crossing the Rafah border. But we do see that this is still quite a major move. Now, the US Justice Department has also released a new batch of lists. We're moving on to our next story now. We're moving away from Rafah and then picking up our last story on the World Brief today, which is essentially the update on this Epstein story. So there's been a new batch of records being released. 3 million of them have been linked to the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. that has triggered renewed scrutiny of public figures mentioned in the material. So there's been a whole lot of new assets, pictures, documents, emails that have been released, and many high-profile figures have been named. Now, among them is the former Prince Andrew. He's now referred to as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor after new images and emails depicted him with a unidentified person, and they have revived questions about his links to Epstein. Now, UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has called on Andrew to testify before Congress in order to give justice to these victims. Quite harrowing pictures that we are seeing there. And then moving on to the other high-profile people on this list. So firstly, you've got the former US ambassador, the UK ambassador to the United States, that is Lord Mandelson. So he's also been ignited in this, and he is now resigned from the Labour Party. He had already stepped down as ambassador, but he's now resigned from the Labour Party over his ties to Epstein. And then you've got the Crown Princess of Norway, Mette-Marit. She's also been named in these newly released documents. And you've got the Norwegian Prime Minister saying that it's not the greatest of situations. Now, moving on to elite universities, you do have a Harvard physics professor. She has also been named. Her name is Lisa J. Randall, and it's believed that she traveled on Epstein's private jet. And then you also have LA Olympics chief Casey Wasserman. Now, this is quite interesting. If you haven't heard of him before, he's the person in charge of the next Olympics, which is going to be taking place in LA. And essentially, he and Ghislaine Maxwell were said to have been exchanging messages and emails over a certain period of time. He has apologized for the tone of he was apologizing in those emails for the tone of his past messages. So it's just an example of how far-reaching these documents go. Now, for his part, US President Donald Trump says that the latest files absolve him, even though Donald Trump's name was mentioned more than 1,000 times. And he has threatened legal action also against an author by the name of Michael Wolff. And he is also suing not only Wolff, but he's also suing the Epstein estate for what he calls their efforts to conspire with Epstein in order to damage him politically. As we can see, he obviously knows who, or knew who Jeffrey Epstein is. He has been pictured with him many times. Now, critics and survivors, as well as advocates, say that the disclosure still leaves key questions unanswered, accusing authorities of selective redactions that protect the powerful men around the world while exposing those victims. So we'll see if any other admissions are made, if any other powerful people are named and exposed, and whether or not the victims will feel vindicated at long last. Well, let's move on to our newspaper headlines across the world. As ever, we begin with the front page of This Day newspaper. And This Day does report that the Defense Minister, General Christopher Musa, has said that he was marked for arrest and possible elimination in that foiled coup plot involving military officers and civilians, with several suspects arrested and others pursued through Interpol. He did describe the plotters as unserious and said a coup is nearly impossible in today's Nigeria. Musa also said that Nigeria's defense pact with Turkey will not harm relations with the United States, stressing that Nigeria's non-aligned foreign policy is working. Also on the front page of This Day, we do have a picture of the daughter of the deceased, Her Excellency Mrs. Toyin Ojora Saraki, as well as the chairman of This Day and Arise Media Group, Prince Nduka Obaegbena, as well as the former Senate President and son-in-law of the deceased, Dr. Bukola Saraki, during the chairman's visit to their Ikoyi home of the Ojoras, following, of course, the demise of their patriarch. And then you also have another picture headline that shows the widow of the deceased, Erelu Ojoralape Ojora, as well as the Ogun State Governor, Prince Dapo Abiodun, also on a condolence visit to the Ojora household. We do continue to extend our deepest condolences to the Ojora family. Now, moving on to the New Telegraph. The New Telegraph does report that Aviation Minister Festus Keyamo has raised alarm over military and security personnel smuggling firearms onto commercial flights. He says that these obviously breach aviation safety controls, and he plans to meet President Tinubu to curb these violations, which airlines say pose serious security risks and often lead to tensions when regulations are not properly enforced. Moving on to the Daily Independent. The Daily Independent does report that pressure is mounting on the Central Bank of Nigeria to extend the March 31st, 2026 recapitalization deadline. That's as many mid-tier and smaller banks are struggling to meet new capital requirements. We have the Punch this morning. The Punch does report that the Lagos State House of Assembly has invited leaders of Makoko and other affected waterfront communities to a meeting on Tuesday, the 3rd of February. That's tomorrow. And that is following petitions over recent demolitions. The Assembly said that the meeting aims to review complaints that homes were being demolished beyond agreed safety limits, allegedly without adequate notice, compensation or resettlement. Well, let's move on to the Daily Trust. The Daily Trust reports that Yobe State Governor Mai Malabuni has inaugurated a world-class scientific research and training centre in the state. He's described it as a major milestone for healthcare, research and human capital development. The facility is expected to boost biomedical research, training and innovation while positioning Yobe as a hub for scientific advancement in the region. And then, if we take a look at The Guardian this morning, we're looking at employment. So the paper reports that as formal jobs shrink in Nigeria, millions are turning to small, survival-driven businesses rather than sustainable entrepreneurship. Now, data does show that Nigerians are continuing to save in order to start or expand micro ventures, but high rents, weak infrastructure, energy costs, narrow depreciations, and low profits are also limiting growth of this type of entrepreneurship. Let's move on to our UK papers. As ever, we begin with the front page of the Daily Mirror this morning, and it does hone in on this Epstein issue. So it does report that there are allegations that a second woman has claimed that she had a sexual encounter with Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, as suggested in the Epstein files. Andrew has reiterated vigorously that he denies these accusations against him and that it must be made clear that being mentioned in the Epstein files does not necessarily indicate any wrongdoing. Well, moving on to the Daily Telegraph, and its front page has an embarrassing picture of Lord Mandelson. He is pictured in his underwear alongside an unidentified woman as part of these newly released Epstein files. He is set to be summoned in order to give evidence before the US Congress about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Again, we have to stress that being mentioned in the Epstein files is not a sign of wrongdoing. And then lastly, we do have The Guardian this morning. So The Guardian does have this story at the top here, which says that in these documents released by the US government, does include claims that Jeffrey Epstein paid $75,000 to accounts linked to Peter Mandelson. And there is also clearly a lot of controversy there. But one of the highlights of the weekend is definitely looking at King Carlos Alcaraz, who defeated Novak Djokovic in 4 sets to win the Australian Open and complete a career Grand Slam. So for those who aren't too savvy on tennis terminology, a career Grand Slam is when all 4 major championships have been won at some point in someone's career. Carlos Alcaraz is only 22 years old, so this is a major feat. He is the youngest athlete to ever to achieve such a feat. So huge congratulations to Carlos Alcaraz. And I told you he was going to win.
Real quick, I really want to say this about Israel. The hypocrisy of Israel is stunning. You're opening the Rafah crossing, you say 100 people should go through. The same Rafah crossing that there are over 20,000 people that are sick, that need help to be able to cross and get medical care. Once again, finally, after years of lies, Israel has finally accepted that the Gaza Health Authority medical reports and results of people that have died was correct. Yeah. So they had been lying all this while. All right.
By the way, now that the president is back in the country, I recommend an article by Davison Irienpan of This Day on Sunday, yesterday, page 59. He has a question. When will the federal government release Osun State funds? Which was a question we raised while the president was away. Yeah. And if you look at the papers today, Vanguard, Daily Trust, The Sun, they're also asking the same question. And the Osun State House of Assembly had a world press conference yesterday where they said anybody that has taken a penny of Osun State money illegally, that they will recover the money. Yes. And that section 7 of the Constitution cannot be wiped out.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Adefemi. We'll see you again tomorrow.